6 months ago, my own flesh and blood left me for dead in a cold hospital hallway because, to them, my life wasn't worth the price of a fancy watch. Tonight, they sat across from me in a private booth at the Gilded Spoon, the kind of steakhouse in Riverbend, Missouri, where the prices on the menu might as well be phone numbers, and asked me to hand them $500,000 in cash to chase a pipe dream. I looked at their perfectly coiffed hair, their designer clothes, their smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I touched the faint, jagged scar hidden beneath my button-down shirt, a stark reminder of where the surgeons had cut me open, saving the life my children didn't care to save. And as the waiter poured an aged Cabernet, a bottle that cost more than my first month's mortgage payment, I prepared to burn their carefully constructed world to the ground. The air conditioning inside the Gilded Spoon was set to a chill that could preserve a polar bear, but I was sweating. My charcoal suit, the one I'd bought for Eleanor's funeral 3 years ago, felt like a vice around my chest. It was too tight in the shoulders, and the wool scratched at my neck, but I didn't loosen my tie. I was raised to have manners, to hold myself with dignity, even when I was dining with vultures. I sat there and watched my son, Garrett. He's 38 now, but in that dim, intimate restaurant light, he looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. His expensive watch glinted as he held the wine list like it was a sacred text, his brow furrowed in concentration. He snapped his fingers, a sharp, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl, summoning the sommelier. 40 years I spent in construction, hauling concrete, climbing, scaffolding, pouring foundations. I know how hard people work for a living, the ache in their bones, the sweat in their eyes. Seeing my son treat a worker like a servant made me want to get up and walk out right then and there. "Bring us the Cabernet," Garrett commanded, pointing at a line on the menu without even glancing at the price, as if money were an abstract concept for lesser mortals. "And make sure it breathes for at least 15 minutes. We wouldn't want to rush perfection." I looked down at the crisp white tablecloth. My hands rested there, gnarled and ugly, the knuckles swollen from arthritis, a permanent roadmap of every hammer blow and every cold winter morning. A scar, thin and white, ran down my left thumb from a table saw accident back in '98, a reminder of a piece of me I almost lost. The skin was rough, like sandpaper, permanently stained by oil and cement dust that no amount of scrubbing, no amount of fancy soap could ever fully remove. These were the hands of a man who built half the foundations in Riverbend, the hands that built the schools, the community center, the very streets they drove their luxury cars on. Then I looked at Garrett's hands. They were soft, unblemished, his fingernails manicured, buffed to a shine that reflected the restaurant's muted lights. On his wrist, a Rolex Submariner, catching every flicker of light. I knew for a fact he was still making payments on it, a monthly drain on his already shaky finances. He was leasing a lifestyle he couldn't afford, trying to impress people he didn't even like, probably because he saw them as stepping stones to a higher social rung. It was a performance, and tonight I was the reluctant audience. "Art, you look wonderful, Chelsea," my daughter-in-law cooed, reaching across the table to touch my arm. Her fingers were cold, belying the warmth in her voice. Her voice, high and sweet like the syrup they put on pancakes at the local diner, masked the bitter medicine she was about to force down my throat. "That suit really brings out the dignity in your eyes. You've still got it, you know." I didn't smile. I knew what she was doing. I had been a general contractor for 4 decades. I knew when someone was inspecting a building to see if the foundation was cracking, if there were structural weaknesses they could exploit. She wasn't looking at my eyes for dignity. She was looking at the old Timex watch on my wrist, a relic that Eleanor had given me decades ago. She was looking at the fraying collar of my shirt, a subtle sign of age, perhaps. But mostly, she was looking at me the way a butcher looks at a prize cow, estimating how much value she could harvest before the end. The glint in her eyes wasn't affection. It was a hungry assessment. "I'm fine, Chelsea," I said, taking a sip of water. I refused to order the $20 cocktails they were nursing, just an old man eating dinner. "Oh, stop it, Dad," Garrett laughed, but his eyes didn't join in the merriment. It was a hollow, practiced sound. "You're as strong as an ox. That heart attack 6 months ago was just a speed bump. You've got another 20 years in you, easily." A speed bump. That's what he called the night my heart stopped beating. The words hit me like a physical blow. A fresh wave of betrayal. I felt a flash of anger so hot, it almost made me dizzy. A sudden urge to stand up and expose them right there. But I pushed it down, deep into the recesses of my gut. I needed to hear them out. I needed to see exactly how far they would go, how deep their avarice ran. The waiter poured the wine, an expensive ritual that felt out of place with my churning stomach. Garrett swirled it in his glass, sniffed it with a theatrical flourish, and gave a practiced, discerning nod. All I wanted was a cold beer, a simple domestic brew, but I kept my mouth shut. My time for speaking would come. "So, Dad," Garrett began, leaning forward, his tone shifting. The casual dinner chat was over. This was the sales pitch, the kind I recognized immediately. It was the same tone con artists used when they tried to sell me bad lumber back in the day. Smooth as silk, but with rot hidden beneath the surface. "We didn't just bring you here for the steak. As good as it is," he flashed a charming, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've found it. The opportunity of a lifetime." Chelsea nodded enthusiastically beside him, her perfectly sculpted hair barely moving. "It's destiny, Art. Absolute destiny. The stars have aligned for us." I slowly cut a piece of my New York strip. I chewed it thoroughly, savoring the rich, smoky flavor, letting the moment stretch, letting their anticipation build. "What opportunity?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying no emotion. Garrett pulled out his phone, a gleaming slab of glass and metal, and started swiping through photos. "It's a location in the West Loop, Riverbend, prime real estate, an old industrial warehouse that's just begging to be converted into something spectacular." He held the phone out to me. "Chelsea and I have been working on a concept. A fusion restaurant. High-end, exclusive, the kind of place where you need a reservation 3 months in advance, where the who's who of Riverbend society will be clamoring for a table." I looked at the pictures. A dilapidated brick building, broken windows staring out like vacant eyes, graffiti scrawled on its weathered walls. It looked like a ruin, a monument to forgotten industry. "It looks like a ruin," I stated flatly, not trying to hide my unimpressed tone. "That's the beauty of it," Chelsea interjected, her voice rising with forced enthusiasm. "It has character. We have the vision, art. We have the menu planned, a culinary journey that will revolutionize the dining scene. We have the design team ready, poised to transform it into a breathtaking space. We just need the capital to secure the lease and start the renovations. It's a ground floor opportunity, Dad." I put my fork down. The metal clinked loudly against the china plate, a small, sharp sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient hum. I looked from my son to his wife. They were dressed in designer clothes, a careful assembly of labels and trends. They drove a BMW that belonged to the bank, a luxury car on a perpetual lease. They lived in a high-rise condo downtown, a place I had foolishly co-signed for 5 years ago, hoping to give them a leg up, hoping they'd build something of their own. And here they were, asking for more, their ambition boundless, their sense of entitlement even more so. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the roar that was building in my chest. Garrett cleared his throat. He took a big sip of wine, as if for courage, or perhaps just to buy time. "We've run the numbers, Dad. To secure the location, do the build-out, and have operating cash for the first 6 months, we need $500,000. The number hung in the air between us, a heavy, suffocating weight. 500,000. $500,000 cash, Brandon added quickly, as if to emphasize the urgency and the sheer audacity of the request. "We need to move fast. There are other bidders circling, major players. If we can put the cash down this week, the landlord will give us the keys. It's a tight timeline, but the reward will be immense." I looked at him, really looked at him. I tried to find the little boy who used to follow me around job sites, his small hands trying to carry my oversized tool belt. I tried to find the eager teenager I taught to drive stick shift in my old Ford F-150, the one I spent countless weekends restoring in the garage, but they were gone. Sitting in front of me was a stranger, with greedy, desperate eyes, a man I barely recognized. "You want $500,000, I repeated slowly, letting each word hang in the air, a challenge. "It's an investment, Dad," Chelsea cut in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning in as if sharing a secret. Think about the legacy. The Jenkins family name on the hottest spot in Riverbend. And we'd pay you back, with interest. Or equity. We can discuss the terms. Naturally. They thought I was stupid. They thought that because I spent my life covered in drywall dust and sawdust, my brain had stopped working. They thought that because I lived alone in the old house in the suburbs and drove a beat-up truck, I didn't know the value of a dollar, didn't understand the machinations of the modern world. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table, even though every fiber of my being wanted to. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my tight jacket. I pulled out my wallet. It was old leather, cracked and worn at the edges, shaped by years of sitting in my back pocket. Garrett's eyes lit up, a flicker of pure anticipation. He actually thought I was going to pull out a checkbook, right there between the appetizer and the main course. He thought I was going to write him a check for $500,000 without a second thought, without a single question. But I didn't open the cash compartment. I reached into the hidden slot behind my ID. My fingers brushed against the folded piece of paper I had kept there for exactly 180 days, a grim reminder of their betrayal, a quiet testament to their abandonment. I pulled it out. It was a single sheet of paper, folded into quarters, the edges soft and fuzzy from wear. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, smoothing it out on the crisp white tablecloth next to the expensive wine glass. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a bank statement showing my millions. Garrett looked down, his brow furrowed in confusion, his smile faltering for the first time. Chelsea squinted, trying to read the faded ink upside down. "What is this?" Garrett asked, his voice losing its confident edge, a hint of unease creeping in. I placed my heavy, calloused hand on the paper, covering the amount. "Read it," I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the noise of the restaurant like a diamond saw cutting through granite. "Read the date and read the total." It was a hospital bill from Mercy General Hospital, dated November 14th of last year. The total amount due was $52,300, printed in bold red ink at the bottom. It was the cost of the emergency angioplasty and the specialized stent procedure that my insurance had deemed elective and, through some bureaucratic tangle, refused to cover up front. Garrett picked up the paper, his manicured fingers brushing over the crinkled edges. He squinted at the numbers and then looked at me with a confused expression, as if I had handed him a menu written in a language he didn't speak. "That's a medical bill," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, a hint of annoyance. "Why are you showing us this?" "Because 6 months ago, on that specific date, I was lying on a gurney in the emergency room hallway, convinced I was taking my last breaths. It started as a pressure in the center of my chest, like someone had parked a cement mixer right on my sternum. Then the pain radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. I've broken bones, torn ligaments, stepped on rusty nails in my line of work, but I have never felt pain like that. It was absolute and terrifying. The kind of pain that makes you question everything, makes you confront your own mortality. The triage nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, told me I needed a specific procedure immediately to clear the blockage. But because of a clerical error with my provider, some technicality with the specific nature of the device they needed to use, the hospital required a significant deposit before they could wheel me into surgery. They needed money I didn't have liquid in my checking account. My savings were in investments, not readily accessible for an emergency that developed in minutes. So, I did what any father would do. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. My vision was blurring at the edges, and every beat of my heart felt like it might be the last one. I scrolled to your name, Garrett, my firstborn. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man I had co-signed loans for, the one I had poured my dreams into. I pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then you answered, but you didn't say hello. I heard the heavy thumping bass of electronic dance music. I heard laughter, shrill and distant, and the clinking of glasses. You were shouting over the noise. "What is it, Dad?" you yelled. "I'm kind of in the middle of something here." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I was gasping for air, each word a monumental effort. "I told you I was at the hospital. I told you I was having a heart attack. I told you they needed a payment or they wouldn't operate." And do you remember what you said to me, Garrett? I looked across the table at him now. He shifted in his seat, taking a nervous sip of his expensive wine, refusing to meet my eyes. He didn't answer, so I answered for him. You sighed. A loud, impatient sigh. You said, Dad, you have insurance for this kind of thing. Look, I can't transfer anything right now. All my liquidity is tied up in crypto. The market is volatile, and if I pull out now, I'll lose my position. Then you said, call Brooke, and you hung up. The line went dead. I was holding the phone against my ear, listening to the silence, the crushing silence, while my heart struggled to pump blood through my veins, while I thought I was dying. I called your sister next, Brooke. She told me she had her own debts, new designer bags, and a renovation she had just started on their kitchen. She suggested maybe I should look into a reverse mortgage on the house, as if my home, the home Eleanor and I built, was just an ATM for her convenience. I was alone, truly and completely alone. The hospital administrator was standing over me with a clipboard, looking at me with pity, but not enough pity to waive the policy, not enough to risk her job. I needed cash fast. I didn't have time to argue. I didn't have time to cry about raising children who valued digital coins and new kitchen cabinets over their father's life. I pulled myself off that gurney. The nurses tried to stop me, their voices urgent, telling me I could die if I exerted myself. I told them I'd be right back. I walked out into the hospital parking lot. It was freezing that night. The wind off the Riverbend Lake cut right through my thin jacket, slicing through my resolve. I was sweating cold, clammy sweat, and my chest felt like it was being crushed by a vice, each breath a struggle against an invisible weight. I walked to my truck. It was a 1978 Ford F-150. Custom cab, two-tone paint, blue and white. It wasn't just a truck. It was the first new vehicle Eleanor and I ever bought together. It was the truck I drove when I picked up your mother for our first anniversary dinner, dressed in my best suit, feeling like the luckiest man alive. It was the truck where I taught you how to drive, stick shift in the high school parking lot on Sunday afternoons, your young hands gripping the wheel, your feet fumbling with the clutch. It was the truck Eleanor loved. She used to say that the rumble of that V8 engine was the sound of safety, because it meant I was coming home. I had restored it with my own hands. Every bolt, every hose, every inch of upholstery, every dent lovingly smoothed. It was worth $40,000 easily to the right collector, maybe more, a piece of American history, a piece of my time's history. But I didn't have time to find a collector. I drove it, wincing with every turn of the wheel, down the street to Honest Harry's Motors, a 24-hour used car lot that advertised instant cash for titles. The guy working there was a shark, a slick-haired man with eyes that saw desperation as an opportunity. He saw an old man clutching his chest, pale as a sheet, desperate for money. He walked around the truck, kicking the tires, pointing out invisible scratches, trying to find flaws that weren't there. He knew what he had. He knew what I needed. I'll give you $12,000 for it, he said, blowing cigarette smoke in my face, a cloud of acrid shame. Take it or leave it, Pops, he added, turning his back on me, already moving on to the next easy mark. I wheezed, It's worth 3 times that. But my voice was weak, barely a whisper. I signed the title over on the hood of the truck, the cold metal biting at my shaking hands. My hand was trembling so badly, I could barely write my own name. I took the check. I handed him the keys. I watched him get in and rev the engine, grinding the gears because he didn't know how to treat a lady like that. He didn't understand the soul of that machine, the memories it held. I walked back to the hospital in the freezing cold, the $12,000 feeling like blood money in my pocket. I paid the deposit, I had the surgery, and when I woke up in the recovery room, there were no flowers, there were no cards, there was just the empty chair beside my bed and the crushing realization that my truck, my last tangible link to Eleanor, was gone, and my children were strangers. My children, my own flesh and blood, had left me to die, and a stranger, a used car salesman, had shown me more mercy. I finished my story and let the silence hang heavy over the table. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, all seemed to fade away, replaced by the deafening sound of my own words, echoing in the space between us. Garrett was staring at his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes, a flush creeping up his neck. He looked uncomfortable, certainly, but not heartbroken. He looked like a man who had been caught in a minor lie, not a son who had abandoned his father. He was calculating, not repenting. But it was Chelsea's reaction that truly turned my stomach. She let out a short, dismissive breath, almost a laugh, a sound of utter contempt. She waved her hand in the air, as if she were shooing away a bothersome fly, an irritating inconvenience in her carefully planned evening. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Art," she said, rolling her eyes, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's ancient history. Why are you bringing up all that drama now? It's over. You survived. Can't we just move on?" "Drama," I repeated, my voice low and dangerous, a rumble of thunder before a storm. "Yes, drama," she insisted, leaning forward, her expensive jewelry clinking against the table, a sound of arrogant confidence. "You survived, didn't you? You're sitting right here eating a steak." The surgery obviously worked, and honestly, that old truck was an eyesore. It smelled like gasoline and old dogs. "You should be thanking us for forcing you to upgrade. We were busy. People get busy. It happens. It's not like we planned for you to have a heart attack right when Garrett's crypto was crashing." She picked up her wine glass and took a long swallow, leaving a crimson lipstick stain on the rim, a mark of her careless disregard. "We're talking about the future here, Art," she continued, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she used when she thought I was being difficult, when I wasn't falling in line with their expectations. "We're talking about building generational wealth. We're talking about an investment that will pay off 10 times over. Why are you dwelling on the past when we're trying to make you rich? You need to get over it. Now, about the 500,000, I looked at her. I looked at the woman my son had married, the woman he had chosen to be his partner. I saw the absolute void behind her eyes where empathy should have been. A cold, calculating emptiness. She didn't care that I had almost died. She didn't care that I had to sell the last physical piece of my wife I had left. To her, my near-death experience, my agonizing sacrifice, was just an inconvenience, a stumbling block in her conversation about money, a minor detail to be swept under the rug. She thought I was just an ATM with a pulse, a source of endless cash flow. And Garrett, my son, sat there and let her speak to me that way. He didn't defend me. He didn't apologize. He just nodded along, tapping his fingers on the table, waiting for me to open my wallet again, waiting for the inevitable capitulation. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the same calm I felt before demolishing a condemned building. You check the supports, you clear the area, and you plant the charges. The foundation was rotten, and it was time for it to come down. "You're right, Chelsea," I said, my voice surprisingly even, folding the hospital invoice and putting it back into my pocket. "I am alive, and I am thinking about the future." Their faces lit up, like children on Christmas morning. They thought they had won. They thought the old man had capitulated, just like he always did, just like they expected him to. "Good," Garrett said, smiling that plastic smile, a predatory grin. "I knew you'd see reason, Dad. So, how do we do this?" "A wire transfer would be fastest. We can go to the bank tomorrow morning." I picked up my napkin and wiped my mouth. I stood up slowly, deliberately, buttoning my tight jacket. "I am not giving you a wire transfer," I said, my voice clear and firm. Garrett looked confused, his triumphant smile faltering. "A check, then? A cashier's check is fine. Anything that gets us the funds quickly." "I am not giving you a check either," I said, looking him dead in the eye. Chelsea's smile vanished completely. "Then how are you going to give us the money, Art? Are you going to hand us $500,000 in cash?" She scoffed, as if the idea was ridiculous. I looked down at them, still seated at the table. I looked at the expensive wine, the unfinished steaks, the Rolex, the designer dress. I looked at two people who believed the world owed them a living simply because they existed, simply because they were born into privilege. I reached into my pocket again. This time, I pulled out a single $100 bill. I dropped it onto the table. It fluttered down, a small, green rectangle, and landed right in the center of their untouched plate of appetizers. A silent, stark insult. That's for my steak, I said, my voice resonating with a finality that brooked no argument. Dad, what are you doing? Garrett asked, his voice rising in panic, the carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. Sit down. We haven't finished discussing the business plan. There is no business plan, I said, and there is no $500,000. Not for you. Chelsea stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the polished marble floor, the sound harsh and grating. You can't be serious. You have the money. We know you have it. You sold the house. You have savings. You're just being spiteful because we didn't pick up the phone one time. One time. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound that tasted like ashes in my mouth. It wasn't one time. It was a lifetime of taking and never giving. It was a lifetime of you thinking I was a fool, an endless wellspring of cash to be exploited. It was a lifetime of entitlement that ends tonight. I turned to walk away. Garrett grabbed my arm, his grip weak. Nothing like the grip of a man who worked with his hands. Nothing like the grip of the boy who used to cling to my leg. Dad, stop! He hissed, his voice low and urgent, laced with desperation. You're making a scene. People are staring. Let them stare, I said, pulling my arm free with a swift, easy motion. Maybe they'll learn something about the cost of blood. Maybe they'll learn that sometimes even family has to pay the price for their choices. I walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I heard Chelsea shouting something about being selfish, about ruining their lives, but her voice was drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears, the triumphant roar of a battle finally joined. I walked out into the cool night air of Riverbend. The city lights were blurring around me, a shimmering halo of unreality. I felt lightheaded, but not from sickness. I felt lightheaded from the sheer, liberating weight of the bridge I had just burned. The fire was lit, but I knew this wasn't over. As I walked towards the bus stop, my phone started buzzing in my pocket. It was Brooke, my daughter. Then Kevin, my son-in-law. The vultures were gathering. They wouldn't let $500,000 slip away without a fight. They would come for me. They would come with guilt, with threats, with tears, with every weapon in their emotional arsenal. But they didn't know one thing. They didn't know that the Arthur Jenkins they thought they could manipulate had died on that operating table 6 months ago. The man who walked out of that hospital was someone else entirely. A man forged in pain and betrayal. And he was ready for war. End of chapter. I locked the heavy oak front door of my house in Riverbend and threw the deadbolt. The sound of the metal sliding into place, a solid, definitive click, echoed like a gunshot in the silent hallway. Outside, I could still hear Brooke's muffled sobbing and Kevin's angry shouting, their voices distorted by distance and the thick wood, but they were on the other side of 2 inches of solid oak and 40 years of a paid-off mortgage. They were on the other side of a line I had finally drawn. I didn't look out the window. I didn't check to see if they were leaving. I went straight to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water, the cold liquid a sharp contrast to the fire still burning in my gut. My hands were steady now, the adrenaline settling into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The initial surge of righteous anger had passed, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was strategy. I needed a professional. I needed someone who could dig through the dirt without getting their hands muddy, someone who knew the labyrinthine paths of the law and the dark corners of human nature. I picked up the landline, the old beige rotary phone that hung on the wall. I didn't use my cell phone because I didn't want any digital footprint of this call. Not yet. Not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago, a number that represented a lifetime of trust and unspoken understanding. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Sterling Law. Lenny, I said. My voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me. It's Art. I need to see you now. It's urgent. Leonard Lenny Sterling had been my attorney since I started my contracting business back in 1982. He's a man cut from the same cloth as me, a man of integrity forged in the trenches of real life. He doesn't wear Italian suits, not unless he absolutely has to. And he doesn't work in a gleaming glass tower downtown. His office is a small, unassuming brick building nestled next to the Riverbend County Courthouse. A place that smells of old paper, stale coffee, and the subtle, earthy aroma of the pipe tobacco he smokes when he thinks nobody is looking. Lenny is 72 years old, short, bald, with a mind like a steel trap. He's also the only person on Earth, besides the IRS, who knows exactly how much I am worth. Every dollar, every asset, every piece of land I meticulously acquired over the decades. I drove over to his office in my new truck, a reliable but unflashy Ford F-250, taking the back roads, winding through the quieter, older parts of Riverbend to avoid seeing my children's cars tailing me. When I walked in, Lenny was sitting behind his desk, buried under a mountain of files, legal tomes stacked precariously around him like ancient ruins. He looked up over his reading glasses, his bushy gray eyebrows knitting together, a silent question in his piercing gaze. "Art," he grunted, a familiar, no-nonsense greeting. He pointed to the worn leather armchair opposite him, the one I had sat in countless times over the years. "You look like you just went 12 rounds with a concrete mixer. Sit down." I sat. The leather creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. I didn't waste time with small talk. No polite pleasantries. "My kids are trying to hustle me, Lenny," I said, leaning forward, getting straight to the point. "Last night it was $500,000 for a restaurant that doesn't exist. This morning it was $50,000 for a bookie who's supposedly going to cut off Garrett's fingers. They tried to get me to liquidate assets on the spot." Lenny let out a low whistle, a sound of grim recognition. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his gaze distant as he processed the information. "That's aggressive," he said, his voice grave. "Even for them. I told you this would happen, Art. When Eleanor passed, I told you the vultures would start circling. People smell grief, and they think it smells like opportunity, like fresh meat." "I know," I said, rubbing my face with my calloused hands, feeling the fatigue deep in my bones. "But this feels different, Lenny. It's desperate. They're not just greedy, they're panicked. Garrett is terrified of something. I could see it in his eyes, even through the lies. And Kevin was looking at my garage like he wanted to pawn my riding mower." The casual cruelty of that observation, the sheer audacity of it, still stung. Lenny opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a classic fountain pen, its nib gleaming under the desk lamp. "So, what do you want to do?" he asked, his voice businesslike, cutting through the emotional noise. "Do you want to cut them a check and make them go away? Sometimes, Art, that's the path of least resistance." "No," I said sharply, the words snapping in the quiet office. "Not a dime. I want to know the truth. I want to know what is actually happening. I want to know what kind of mess they've gotten themselves into and who they've pulled into it with them." Lenny nodded, scratching something on the pad, his pen gliding across the paper. "Okay, we dig. Full background check. No stone unturned." "I need you to run a full financial background check on Garrett," I instructed, my voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I want to know every credit card, every loan, every lien. If he owes money to a bookie, I want to know who. If he's in trouble, I want to know how deep. And Lenny, I want you to look into a property in the West Loop, an old industrial warehouse. Garrett said he wanted to lease it for a restaurant." Lenny stopped writing and looked up, his eyes sharp, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. "Lease it?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "That's what he said. $500,000 for the lease and the build-out." Lenny snorted, a derisive sound. $500,000 for a lease in this market, Art? That buys you a building outright in some neighborhoods, especially a distressed warehouse property. If he's asking for that much cash up front for a rental, he's either the worst businessman in Riverbend or he's lying. "He's lying," I said, the words heavy with resignation. "I just need to prove it. I need the paper truth." Lenny leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers, his gaze steady and knowing. "You know, Art, if we open this door, you might not like what we find. Sometimes it's easier to be the grumpy old man who said no than to be the father who knows exactly how rotten his kids are. Ignorance, sometimes, is a perverse kind of bliss." I thought about that. I thought about the way Brooke had looked at me this morning, her face a mask of manufactured grief, the way she called me a monster. I thought about Garrett's silence at the Gilded Spoon while his wife Chelsea insulted me, trivialized my pain. I thought about Eleanor and what she would have wanted. "I don't care about easy anymore, Lenny," I said, my voice hardening. I care about the truth, and I need to protect what I built, not just for me, but for Eleanor's memory. Lenny nodded solemnly. He reached for a file in the corner of his desk, a thick manila folder marked with my name, Jenkins, Arthur P. "Speaking of what you built," he said, opening the file, its contents neatly organized, "we need to talk about your liquidity. Your tenants in the 3 apartment complexes in the south suburbs have all paid rent on time this month. The commercial strip mall on Main Street is fully leased for the next 5 years. And your investment portfolio managed to dodge the latest market dip thanks to some prudent adjustments we made earlier this year." He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. It was a balance sheet, detailed and precise. The bottom line showed a net worth north of $8 million. My children thought I was a poor old man living on a pension and a prayer, a relic of a bygone era. They saw the old clothes, the beat-up truck I used to drive, the coupon clipping, the careful budgeting. They didn't know that for 40 years I had taken every dollar of profit from my construction company and bought land when it was cheap, when no one else saw the potential. They didn't know I built rental units with my own crew at cost, pouring my own labor, my own sweat, into every beam and every foundation. They didn't know that while they were buying leased luxury cars and taking vacations on credit, I was compounding interest, carefully growing a fortune, building a real legacy. "They think I'm broke, Lenny," I said, looking at the numbers, a grim satisfaction curling in my gut. "They think the only money I have is from selling the house." "Good," Lenny said, closing the file with a decisive snap. "Keep it that way. Money is like blood in the water, Art. If they know the real number, they won't stop at 50,000. They'll come for everything. They'll try to declare you incompetent. It's a common tactic against the elderly, a sickening form of financial abuse. That's what I'm afraid of," I said quietly, the chilling realization settling over me. "Chelsea made a comment last night. She said, 'Seniors have accidents.' She said, 'If I didn't pay, they might not be able to check on me.'" Lenny's face went hard, stone hard, his easygoing demeanor vanishing, replaced by the formidable lawyer he truly was. He sat up straight, his eyes narrowed, the lawyer in him taking over completely. "She threatened you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, each word a cold steel blade. "She implied it. Heavily." Lenny picked up the phone on his desk, not the beige rotary, but a modern, sleek device. "I'm putting a rush on this investigation, Art. I have a private investigator I use for heavy cases. Ex-cop, sharp as a tack, good at digging up things people want hidden. I'll have him on Garrett and the West Loop property by noon." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine concern in his eyes. Not just professional interest. "And Art, watch your back. If they're desperate enough to threaten you, they're desperate enough to do something stupid. Lock your doors. Don't let them in. Trust no one right now." I left Lenny's office an hour later, feeling a little lighter, a burden shared, but also heavier in a different way. I had set the wheels in motion. The investigation would yield results, I had no doubt. But the reality of having to investigate my own son, of exposing his lies, his potential crimes, was a weight that sat on my chest like a wet bag of cement. It was a betrayal deeper than any physical pain. I drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. Brooke's silver SUV was gone, a silent retreat. I checked the perimeter of the property like I was inspecting a construction site. Every beam, every joint. The cedar fence I had fixed this morning was sturdy. The windows were intact, the locks secure. But the sense of safety I used to feel in my own home was gone, cracked down the middle, replaced by a lingering unease. I went inside and locked the door behind me, double-checking the deadbolt. The house felt too big without Eleanor. It was 4 bedrooms of silence, echoing with memories. I walked into the kitchen and opened the pantry. It was stocked with canned soup, crackers, and instant coffee. I could afford steak. I could afford lobster. I could afford to hire a personal chef. But old habits die hard, ingrained from years of lean living and prudent saving. I heated up a can of tomato soup on the stove, standing there, watching the red liquid bubble. A simple comfort. I ate it standing at the counter, dipping a piece of stale bread into the bowl, lost in thought. I looked at the photo of Eleanor on the fridge, a magnet holding it in place. It was taken 5 years ago on our 40th anniversary. She was smiling, that warm, easy smile that made everything feel all right, that made the world a little brighter. I failed them, Ellie, I whispered to the empty room, my voice choked with a sorrow that was both fresh and ancient. We tried to give them a better life than we had. We didn't want them to have to mix mortar in the freezing cold or scrub floors. We gave them college degrees. We gave them down payments. We gave them easy. And we ruined them. We gave them everything but the wisdom to earn it. The landline rang, making me jump, startling me out of my reverie. I looked at the caller ID. It was unknown. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. Not yet. 10 minutes later, my cell phone buzzed. It was a text message from Lenny. Made a few calls. Preliminary look at the West Loop property. You need to come back to the office tomorrow morning. You are not going to believe this. I stared at the screen. My gut tightened. The intuition that had kept me alive on dangerous construction sites for 40 years was screaming at me. This wasn't just a simple lie. This was something far more intricate, far more insidious. I put the bowl in the sink. I checked the locks on the doors one more time. I went into the living room and sat in my recliner, the old leather chair that molded to my back, a comforting embrace. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there in the dark, in the quiet, waiting for the morning, waiting to find out just how much my son had lied to me, how deep the rot truly went. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I saw Garrett's face at the restaurant. I saw the greed, the desperation, and for the first time, I wondered if the son I loved was even in there anymore, or if he had been completely replaced by the stranger who wanted my money, the predator who saw me as prey. Tomorrow, I would find out. Tomorrow, the old fox would see the trap, the elaborate snare they had set for me, and then I would have to decide whether to chew my leg off to escape or turn around and bite the hand that set it. End of chapter. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, painting the suburban sky of Riverbend in hues of cold gray and pale orange when I walked out to the backyard. 7 in the morning is early for some, but for a man who spent 40 years waking up before the roosters to pour concrete, it's practically midday. My breath misted in the crisp morning air as I knelt on the damp grass, a heavy wrench in one hand and a galvanized bolt in the other. I was fixing the cedar fence that lined the west side of my property. A storm, a violent summer squall, had loosened 2 of the panels last week, leaving them wobbling like a loose tooth. Most men my age, 71 years old, would hire a handyman. They would sit inside with a cup of tea and watch the news, waiting for the world to come to them. But I am not most men. I like the bite of the morning air, the way it wakes up my senses. I like the resistance of wood and steel, the feeling of a job well done. It reminds me that I am still here, still useful, still capable of holding my world together with my own 2 hands. And it proves that despite what my children might whisper to their friends, my mind and my body are as sharp as the tools in my belt. The physical work cleared my head, letting me focus, letting me process the insidious betrayal I was facing. The silence of the morning, broken only by the chirping of early birds, was shattered by the roar of an engine. It wasn't a neighbor leaving for work, not the familiar hum of a commuter car. It was something urgent, something angry, something driven by desperation. Tires screeched against the asphalt of the street and then crunched loudly as a vehicle swerved aggressively into my driveway, narrowly missing Eleanor's prized rose bushes. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop my wrench. I simply tightened the last bolt, gave the fence post a solid shake to test its stability, a testament to my craftsmanship, and stood up slowly, wiping my greasy hands on the rag I kept in my back pocket. I walked around the side of the house just as the car doors flew open. It was Brooke's silver SUV, the one she constantly complained about the gas mileage, another luxury she felt entitled to. She practically fell out of the driver's seat, wearing oversized sunglasses that hid her eyes and a designer tracksuit that looked disheveled in a way that felt rehearsed, designed to elicit sympathy. Her hair was messy, a carefully art-directed chaos, and she was already crying before her feet even hit the pavement, a theatrical display of distress. Kevin, my son-in-law, stepped out from the passenger side. He's a tall man, soft around the middle, with shifting eyes that never seemed to land on anything for more than a second, constantly scanning for angles, for opportunities. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans, looking around my property with a kind of nervous energy that put me on edge immediately, like a scavenger circling fresh prey. "Dad!" Brooke screamed, running across the lawn, her cries piercing the morning calm. She threw herself at me, clutching my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong, almost bruising. "You have to help. Please, you have to help us." I stiffened. I didn't hug her back. Not yet. I needed to assess the situation first. This wasn't a social call, not at 7 in the morning with that kind of dramatic entrance. This was an ambush, another act in their ongoing play. "What is it, Brooke?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, flat, betraying no emotion. "Is someone hurt? Are the kids okay?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face, slipping out from behind those dark glasses, creating rivulets through her expertly applied makeup. "It's Garrett," she sobbed, her voice thick with manufactured anguish. "He's in trouble, Dad. Real trouble. The kind he can't get out of alone." My stomach tightened for a second. Just a split second, the father in me took over, a primal, automatic response. No matter what had happened at the Gilded Spoon last night, no matter the insults or the greed, Garrett was still my firstborn. The image of him hurt or bleeding, genuinely in peril, sent a cold spike of fear through my gut, a flicker of the love that once was. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, pushing past the emotion, my mind already sifting through the layers of their performance. "Is he in the hospital? Did he have an accident?" "No," Brooke wailed, shaking her head violently, her hair flying around her face. "He lied to you last night, Dad. It's not for a restaurant. There is no restaurant. That was just a story he made up because he was too ashamed to tell you the truth. He was too proud to admit his mistakes." I narrowed my eyes. The initial adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a cold, hard suspicion, a familiar clarity that came when faced with deception. "What truth, Brooke?" "He owes money," she whispered, leaning in close, her voice a desperate plea, as if the hedges, the trees, the very morning air were listening, ready to judge. "Bad money. He got mixed up with some people online. Some gambling syndicate, a dark corner of the internet, and he lost everything. He tried to win it back, and he just dug the hole deeper. They called him this morning Dad. They said if he doesn't pay $50,000 by noon today, they're going to hurt him. They said they're going to cut off his fingers." Her voice cracked on the last words, a sob escaping her throat. I looked at her, trying to process this new narrative, this sudden, drastic pivot. 12 hours ago, he was a visionary restaurateur, needing $500,000 for a fusion kitchen, a culinary empire. Now he was a degenerate gambler needing $50,000 to save his digits, to avoid a gruesome fate. The pivot was fast, too fast. It reeked of improvisation, of a desperate scramble for a new lie. And then I looked up, over Brooke's trembling shoulder. I saw Kevin. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't comforting his hysterical wife. He wasn't pacing with worry for his brother-in-law. He was standing by the corner of the garage, peering into the open door. He was staring directly at the brand-new truck I had bought to replace the Ford I sold 6 months ago. He was looking at my tools, my riding mower, my power washer, his eyes scanning the contents of my garage like an appraiser at an auction, calculating their worth, their potential as collateral. That look, that single, covetous glance, told me everything I needed to know. The threat to Garrett was just a new angle, a fresh hook to open my wallet. "Wait a minute," I said, pulling my arm away from Brooke's grip. I took a step back, creating distance between us, both physical and emotional. "Let me get this straight. Last night he needed $500,000 for induction burners and blast chillers for a culinary revolution. And now this morning he needs $50,000 for a bookie. Which is it, Brooke? Because the math does not add up. If he owes 50, why did he ask for $500,000? Brooke stammered, her face flushing a deep, angry red, betraying the truth of her deceit. The rest was to get out of town, to start over somewhere safe, to buy a new identity. But the 50 is urgent. They're coming for him, Dad. You have to pay it." Kevin stepped forward then, trying to look imposing, trying to use his height and bulk to intimidate me. "Look, Art," he said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound reasonable, trying to adopt a tone of concerned authority. We don't have time to debate the semantics or the accounting. The guy is in mortal danger. We know you have the liquidity. We know you didn't spend all the money from your contracting business. Just cut the check, and we'll handle the delivery. We'll save his life. You wouldn't want to see your own son dismembered, would you? I looked at Kevin. I looked at the greed etched into the lines of his face, the avarice that shone in his shifty eyes. He didn't care about Garrett's fingers. He cared about accessing my bank account, about getting his hands on my money, their desperation a thinly veiled ploy. He thought that fear would make me open my wallet faster than ambition did. You want me to handle it? I asked calmly, my voice steady and hard, a granite slab. Yes, Brooke cried, her voice cracking. Yes, please, just give us the money. We're begging you. Fine, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Get Garrett on the line right now. Tell him to come here immediately. We can't, Brooke shrieked, her eyes wide with panic. He's hiding. He's terrified. They'll find him. Then tell me where he is, I said, punching 3 numbers into my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button. I'm calling the sheriff right now. I know Chief Williams personally. We've played poker together for 20 years, shared stories over beers. I'll have him put Garrett in protective custody immediately. If these threats are real, the police need to be involved. That's how real problems are handled, not by throwing cash at shadowy figures. Brooke's face twisted. Her eyes went wide with genuine panic, a rare glimpse of unmanufactured emotion. No, you can't call the police. They said no cops. If you call the cops, they'll kill him. They'll find him wherever he is hiding. Then we will pay them, I said, my voice unwavering. But not with my money. If Garrett's life is in danger, we will liquidate his assets. I know he has that condo in the city, the one I co-signed. I know he has that BMW, the one he leases. And that watch on his wrist is worth $10,000 easily. A piece of unnecessary flash. Tell him to bring everything here. We will sell it all by noon. We will pay his debt with his own money, with the fruits of his own poor choices. That's how responsibility works. Kevin stepped in front of me, blocking my path to the house, his face ugly now, the mask of the concerned brother-in-law slipping away, revealing the true venom beneath. Listen, old man, he snarled, his voice guttural, laced with contempt. You are not listening to us. We don't have time to sell a condo. We don't have time to pawn a watch. We need cash now. You are sitting on a pile of it, a goddamn dragon guarding your hoard. Stop being a selfish prick and save your son. I looked Kevin dead in the eye. I didn't back down. I tightened my grip on the heavy steel wrench in my hand, just enough for him to notice the gleam of the metal, the latent power in my grip. I am not giving you cash, I said coldly, my voice as hard as the concrete I used to pour. And I am not playing this game. If Garrett is in danger, he goes to the police, or he sells his own toys to pay for his mistakes. But I will not be the bank for his gambling or his lies. My money isn't for bailing out irresponsibility. Brooke let out a scream that sounded more like a tantrum than grief, a raw, primal burst of frustration. You are a monster, she hissed, stepping back as if I were something diseased, something unclean. Your own son is in mortal danger, and you are talking about assets and police reports. Do you want him to die? Is that it? Do you want to see your son in a coffin just so you can keep your precious money in the bank? Eleanor would be ashamed of you. I looked at my daughter, the child I had once adored. I saw the manipulation, the performance, the transparent attempt to play on my emotions. And I saw the absolute lack of respect for the man who raised her, for the sacrifices I had made. I want him to grow up, I said, my voice steady, unyielding. And I want you both to get off my property, unless you are ready to tell me the truth. Because I smell a rat, Brooke. And it smells a lot like a lie cooked up by desperate people who think their father is a fool, someone easily swayed by a few crocodile tears. I turned my back on them and walked toward the house, my heart pounding. But my hands were steady, my resolve unshaken. I heard them shouting behind me, cursing my name, calling me every epithet they could think of, but I didn't stop. I knew this wasn't about a bookie, just like it wasn't about a restaurant. It was about something else entirely. And I was going to find out what it was, even if I had to tear this city apart, brick by brick, to get to the bottom of it. End of chapter. 3 days of suffocating silence followed the morning confrontation. It was the kind of heavy, oppressive quiet that settles over a construction site right before a thunderstorm breaks, a tense stillness before the inevitable explosion. I didn't hear from Garrett. I didn't hear from Brooke. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, black and quiet, like a grenade waiting for someone to pull the pin. I knew they were plotting, regrouping, trying to find a new angle to exploit, a new way to get at my money. I spent those days working on the house with a manic intensity, channeling my anger and sorrow into productive labor. I repainted the trim in the living room, a fresh coat of ivory paint covering years of wear and tear, a symbolic act of renewal. I snaked the drains in the upstairs bathroom, clearing away years of accumulated grime, a metaphor for the cleansing I intended for my family. I power washed the driveway until the concrete looked brand new, stripping away the dirt and stains of the past. I needed to keep my hands busy, my body in motion, because if I stopped, even for a moment, my mind would start replaying the look on my daughter's face when she screamed at me, the utter contempt in Chelsea's voice, the raw, ugly greed in Kevin's eyes. These images, these sounds, were poison. On Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was an unexpected chime, breaking the unnatural quiet. I wiped my hands on a rag, my heart giving a small jolt, and walked to the front door, bracing myself, expecting another ambush. I expected Kevin trying to apologize, perhaps, or Chelsea trying a different angle of manipulation, a softer, more insidious approach. But when I opened the door, there was a stranger standing on my porch. He was a young man, barely 30, wearing a cheap suit that was shiny at the elbows and already starting to fray at the cuffs, clearly out of place in my quiet, well-maintained neighborhood. He held a thick, manila envelope, its edges worn from handling, and a clipboard. "Mr. Arthur Jenkins?" he asked, his voice reedy and professional, checking a name on his clipboard. I nodded. "That's me." He thrust the envelope toward me, an impersonal, almost robotic gesture. "You have been served, sir. Have a nice day." He turned and walked away before I could even ask a question. His mission accomplished. He got into a nondescript sedan, its windows tinted, and drove off, leaving me standing there with the weight of the legal system in my hands, a tangible manifestation of their malice. I went into the kitchen and sat at the table, my hands suddenly trembling. I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of legal documents, thick as a brick, a physical assault of paper. The title on the first page was printed in bold black letters that seemed to jump off the page and slap me in the face, a direct blow to my dignity, to my very being. Emergency petition for temporary conservatorship. Below that, in smaller, less conspicuous letters, petitioners, Garrett Jenkins and Brooke Jenkins Miller. Respondent, Arthur Jenkins. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold rush of shock. My hands started to shake, not from age, but from a rage so pure it felt like liquid fire in my veins, burning away the last vestiges of my paternal affection. They weren't just suing me. They were trying to erase me. They were trying to invalidate my existence, to strip me of my rights, to render me a non-person. The petition claimed that I, Arthur Jenkins, was suffering from rapid cognitive decline and onset dementia. It stated that I was no longer capable of managing my own financial or personal affairs, and that I posed a danger to myself and others, a threat to my own well-being. I flipped the page to the section labeled Evidence of Incapacity. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the lies they had woven from the threads of my life, twisting every action, every sacrifice, into proof of my supposed mental deterioration. Item 1. The respondent recently sold a vintage vehicle valued at $40,000 for a fraction of its worth, exhibiting poor judgment and financial confusion. They used the sale of my beloved Ford F-150, the truck I cherished, the moment I saved my own life, the moment I sacrificed my most prized possession because they wouldn't help me, as proof that I was losing my mind. They twisted my desperation into dementia, my self-preservation into unsound judgment. The audacity of it, the sheer cruelty, was breathtaking. Item 2. The respondent has exhibited aggressive and erratic behavior in public, including a recent incident at a fine dining establishment, where he threw money at family members and caused a scene, indicating a loss of emotional control. My stand at the gilded spoon, my refusal to be bullied, my dignified exit. They had painted it as the tantrum of a senile old man, a public display of my supposed mental unraveling. They painted me as a madman, when all I was doing was asserting my own boundaries, my own worth. Item 3. The respondent is living in squalor, attempting unnecessary and chaotic home repairs at inappropriate hours, signaling a breakdown in daily living skills. Fixing my fence at 7 in the morning, keeping my house maintained, caring for my property as I always had. To them, it was chaos, a sign of my decline. To them, a man working with his hands, a man still capable of doing a job, was a man losing his grip on reality. It was a sick, twisted joke, a complete inversion of the truth. They wanted everything. The petition asked the court to freeze all my assets immediately, to paralyze me financially. It asked for Garrett to be named the conservator of my estate, giving him full, unfettered control over my bank accounts, my properties, my investments. It asked for Brooke to be named the conservator of my person, giving her the legal right to decide where I lived, what medical care I received, who I could see. They wanted to put me in a home, a sterile institution. They wanted to lock me away in a facility, medicate me until I drooled, until I was a shadow of my former self, and then sell off everything I had built for pennies on the dollar, their own personal fire sale, so they could open their phantom restaurant, pay off their debts, and live the life of luxury they felt entitled to. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage was too cold, too deep for such outward displays. I stood up, grabbed the keys to my new truck, and walked out the door. The legal papers clutched in my hand, a burning brand. I drove to Lenny's office like a man possessed. I broke 2 speed limits on the way, the speed limit signs blurring past my window. But I didn't care. The urgency was palpable, a desperate need for action. When I burst into his office, Lenny was on the phone, his back to me. He took one look at my face, at the raw fury etched into my features, hung up without saying goodbye, and stood up, his eyes immediately assessing the gravity of the situation. "What happened, Art?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern. I threw the papers onto his desk. They landed with a heavy thud, scattering some of his meticulously organized files. "They did it, Lenny," I said, my voice rasping, a dry, choked sound. "They actually did it. They're trying to Britney Spears me. They're trying to put me away." Lenny put on his glasses, his expression grim, and picked up the petition. He read in silence, his face growing darker with every page, every insidious lie. He muttered curses under his breath. Words I hadn't heard since we worked on the docks together back in the 70s. Words that spoke of a deep-seated contempt for injustice. "This is nuclear, Art," he said, finally dropping the papers back onto the desk, the sound final and ominous. "This isn't just a lawsuit. This is a declaration of war. They are trying to strip you of your civil rights. If a judge grants this, you won't be able to write a check, sign a contract, or even vote without their permission. Your life, as you know it, will be over." "Can they do this?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe, my legs feeling weak, hollow. "Can they just take a man's life away because they want his money, because they're too lazy and entitled to earn their own?" Lenny rubbed his temples, a gesture of deep thought, of weary experience. "In the state of Missouri, an emergency conservatorship can be granted ex parte, meaning without you even being there, if they can prove immediate danger or severe incapacity. But usually, judges are skeptical. They need concrete medical evidence. They need a doctor to sign off on this, a professional opinion to validate their claims." He flipped to the back of the packet, his fingers rapidly scanning the pages. He stopped, his eyes narrowed, focusing on a particular section. "Here it is," he said, tapping a page with his index finger. "Exhibit D, a physician's statement." I walked over and looked at the page. It was a standard medical form, filled out in sloppy handwriting, almost illegible. It stated that Arthur Jenkins had been examined and found to be suffering from moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease, with symptoms including paranoia, memory loss, and aggression. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Dr. Elias Vance, MD. I stared at the name, a cold chill running down my spine. I knew Dr. Vance. He was my cardiologist. He was the man who had treated my heart condition for 10 years, the one I trusted with my life. But I hadn't seen him in 6 months. I hadn't seen him since the surgery at Mercy General, which was performed by a different surgeon because Dr. Vance was on vacation, attending a medical conference. I haven't seen Vance since last year, I said, pointing at the date on the form, which was dated 3 days ago, a fresh lie. I haven't been to his office. How could he examine me? Lenny looked at the signature closely, scrutinizing every curve, every flourish. He pulled a file from his drawer, my file, and found an old letter from Dr. Vance regarding my blood pressure medication, a document with a genuine signature. He held the two signatures side by side, comparing them with the practiced eye of a seasoned lawyer. They look similar, Lenny grunted, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. But look at the slant on the T. Look at the loop on the S. The pen pressure is different. This isn't a perfect match. He looked up at me, a wolfish grin slowly spreading across his face, a glimmer of the fight in him. Art, this signature is forged. A very good forgery, but sloppy in the details for a trained eye. Forged? I repeated, the word hanging in the air, a shocking revelation. It's a good forgery, Lenny said, but it's sloppy in the details. And if you haven't been to his office, there's no record of a visit, no insurance claim, no copay. If we subpoena his appointment book and it shows you weren't there, this entire petition doesn't just get thrown out. It becomes a felony. They've committed fraud against the court. He picked up his phone, his fingers already dialing. I'm going to call Vance's office right now. We're going to verify this. But Art, listen to me, Lenny continued, his voice serious, his gaze unwavering. This means they are desperate. People don't commit felony fraud unless they are truly backed into a corner, unless they see no other way out. Garrett and Brooke aren't just greedy anymore. They are dangerous. They are gambling their freedom, their entire future, on the hope that you are too old and too tired to fight back, too confused to see through their lies. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I felt a cold calm settling over me again, displacing the white-hot rage, transforming it into a precise, surgical focus. They made one mistake, Lenny, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. What is that, Art? They forgot that I built the house they grew up in, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I know where the beams are. I know where the load-bearing walls are, and I know exactly where to place the dynamite to bring the whole thing down. Lenny smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who loved a good fight, a man who relished the challenge of exposing corruption. Let's get to work, Art. While Lenny made the calls, his voice a low, urgent murmur on the phone, I sat there and thought about my children. I thought about Brooke, the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, who always ran to me for comfort. I thought about Garrett, the boy who wanted to be a superhero, who drew pictures of himself flying, saving the day. Somewhere along the way, those children died. They were replaced by these strangers who would forge a doctor's note, who would commit a felony, to lock their father away, to steal his life savings. The weight of that loss, that complete and utter transformation, was heavier than any physical burden I had ever carried. Lenny hung up the phone a few minutes later, his face grim but resolute. I spoke to the receptionist, he said. Dr. Vance is in Europe. He has been at a medical conference in Geneva for the last week. He couldn't have signed that affidavit 3 days ago unless he has a teleportation device. So it's fake, I said, the words a cold confirmation of their depravity. It's fake, Lenny confirmed, and whoever submitted it to the court just committed perjury and fraud. This isn't just a simple misunderstanding. This is a deliberate, malicious act designed to steal your life. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. My own children were willing to risk prison, willing to risk their freedom, to steal from me. The depth of their moral decay was staggering. So what do we do? I asked, opening my eyes, looking at Lenny. Do we go to the police? Do we have them arrested? Lenny tapped his pen on the desk, a thoughtful, deliberate rhythm. We could, he said, acknowledging the option. We could have them arrested by dinner time, but that's messy. And honestly, Art, if you arrest them, the money they owe, the debts they have, it all becomes your problem in the court of public opinion. You become the dad who put his kids in jail, the bitter old man who couldn't forgive. That's a narrative they'd be all too happy to exploit, to paint themselves as victims. He leaned forward, pushing a heavy cardboard banker's box across his desk. The sound of it sliding against the wood was the only noise in the office for a long moment, a prelude to the ugly truth. The box was filled with paper trails, financial records, the ugly little secrets that people think they can hide in the digital age. Lenny looked tired. He looked like a man who had seen too much of the dark side of human nature, a weariness etched into the lines around his eyes. He was looking at me with a mixture of pity and professional resolve. "Open it, Art," Lenny said, his voice low and gravelly. "But brace yourself. You are not going to like what you see." The private investigator did a deep dive. We pulled credit reports, bank statements, property records. We found the truth, and it is uglier than we thought. I reached into the box and pulled out the first file, labeled Garrett Jenkins Financials. I expected to see names of loan sharks, suspicious cash withdrawals to unknown entities, the footprint of organized crime, or at least a dangerous bookie. Instead, I saw statements from Visa, American Express, and Discover. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the rows of transactions. There were charges for high-end restaurants, not for business, but for lavish personal dinners. Nightclubs, designer clothing stores. There were recurring payments to online gambling sites, DraftKings, FanDuel, and offshore poker rooms, an endless digital addiction. And there were dozens of transfers to a woman named Chloe. Thousands of dollars sent to an address I definitely knew was not his home, not his wife's. "He doesn't owe money to the mob, Art," Lenny said, leaning forward, confirming my dawning horror. "He owes money to the banks. He has maxed out 5 credit cards and taken out 2 personal lines of credit. His total debt is $53,000. Not 500,000, just 53. A paltry sum compared to what he was asking for." I stared at the number. $53,000. It was a lot of money, certainly, but it wasn't a death sentence. It wasn't worth threatening to cut off fingers. It was the kind of debt an irresponsible man racks up when he wants to live like a king on a pauper's salary, a lifestyle fueled by credit and lies. "He lied about the danger," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He lied about the urgency. He lied about everything." "He did," Lenny confirmed, his voice devoid of judgment, just the cold, hard facts. "He is not in danger of losing his fingers. He is in danger of losing his credit score, his reputation, and his wife if she finds out about Chloe." I looked at the bank transfers again. Chloe, thousands of dollars, a secret life. My son wasn't just a liar and a gambler. He was an adulterer. He was betraying everyone in his life simultaneously, a web of deceit woven with reckless abandon. The image of the desperate, terrified man he played at my front door dissolved, replaced by the image of a selfish, entitled child playing with matches, oblivious to the conflagration he was creating. "But why 500,000? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the question burning in my mind. If he owes 53, why ask for 500,000, even with the mistress? That's a huge leap, a massive overreach. Lenny reached into the box again and pulled out a thick binder. It was dustier than the other files, smelling of old toner and bureaucracy. He slammed it onto the desk with a decisive thud. "This is why," he said. "This is the West Loop property." I opened the binder. The first page was a listing from a commercial real estate liquidation firm. There was a photo of the dilapidated brick warehouse Garrett had shown me on his phone, but there was no for lease sign in the window. There was a foreclosure notice, glaring and unambiguous. "Read the listing price," Lenny said, his voice quiet. I looked at the bold print. Bank-owned, cash only, as is. Price, $450,000. $450,000? I repeated, my mind reeling, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to snap into place. Lenny nodded, and Garrett asked for $500,000. "Do the math, Art. He wants the extra 50 to pay off his credit cards," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut. He pays off his gambling debt, gets rid of the mistress payments, and breaks even. He uses my money to clean up his own self-inflicted mess. "It's worse than that," Lenny said, his eyes hard, his voice cutting through my shock. Look at the title search. I had my guy pull the preliminary purchase agreement that was drafted yesterday. It hasn't been signed yet, but it was drafted for a buyer named BNT Hospitality Group LLC. Who is BNT Hospitality? I asked, though I already knew the answer, a sickening certainty. Garrett and Chelsea, Lenny said, confirming my darkest suspicions. He incorporated it 3 days ago, right after he left your house, right after you refused him the first time. Art, he isn't trying to lease that building for a restaurant. He's trying to buy it. He wants you to give him the cash, thinking you're paying for a lease and renovations. But he's going to use that cash to buy the property outright, free and clear, in times his time's name, with times your time's money. I sat back, the room spinning slightly. The sheer audacity of his scheme, the depth of his betrayal, overwhelming me. He steals the property, I said, my voice trembling with a rage that shook me to my core. He uses my money to buy himself an asset worth $500,000, an asset that would generate income, a symbol of his supposed success. And it doesn't stop there, Lenny continued ruthlessly, laying out the autopsy of my son's intricate evil scheme. Once he owns it free and clear, do you know what he does next? He waits 6 months. He does some cosmetic paint jobs, maybe replaces a few windows, nothing substantial. Then he goes to a bank and takes out a commercial mortgage against the property, a cash-out refinance. He pulls out $300,000 or $400,000 of equity. He pays off his debts, buys a new car, maybe goes on a vacation with Chloe, solidifies his image. And if the restaurant fails, if he never even opens it, if it all goes belly up, he walks away. He still has the money. He still has his clean slate. And you, Art, you are left with nothing but a gaping hole in your bank account, a financial wound, and a son who ghosted you, who vanished into the wind, leaving you to deal with the fallout. It was brilliant, in a twisted, evil way. It was the kind of scheme that required planning, foresight, and a complete, utter lack of conscience, a soul devoid of moral compass. He was going to steal a building, I said, the words heavy, choked with a mix of fury and profound sadness. He was going to steal a building right under my nose and make me thank him for the privilege of investing. And to make sure you didn't ask questions, Lenny added, pointing to the medical file, the physical proof of their ultimate betrayal. He tried to take away your legal right to object, to even speak. He tried to have you declared incompetent, a shell of your former self, so he could strip you of everything. Lenny opened the final folder. Inside was the affidavit from Dr. Vance's office manager, notarized and stamped, an official document. It stated unequivocally that Dr. Elias Vance had been out of the country on the date the medical evaluation allegedly took place. It included a copy of his flight itinerary, his hotel receipts from Geneva, indisputable proof of the forgery. This is the nail in the coffin, Art, Lenny said softly, his voice gentle now, recognizing the magnitude of the pain I was in. Forging a doctor's signature on a court document isn't just a dirty trick. It is a Class 3 felony in Missouri. It is perjury. It is fraud. If we hand this to the district attorney, Garrett doesn't just lose the lawsuit. He goes to prison. Minimum 3 years, maybe 5 if the judge is having a bad day, if the prosecutor pushes hard. I looked at the documents spread out across the desk. A horrifying tableau. The credit card statements showing the gambling. The real estate listing showing the foreclosure, the true target. The affidavit proving the forgery, the ultimate betrayal. It was a map of my son's soul, laid bare. And it was a barren, ugly landscape, a wasteland of moral decay. I thought about the morning he was born, how I held him in my arms, his skin so new and fragile, and promised to protect him from the world, from all harm. I thought about the days I spent teaching him how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, how to be a man, a good man, a man of integrity. Somewhere, I had failed. I had raised a wolf and invited him into the sheepfold. But I wasn't a sheep. I was the shepherd. And sometimes, the shepherd has to shoot the wolf to save the flock. I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes, hot and stinging. Not tears of sadness, not tears of regret. These were tears of mourning for the relationship that was dead, for the son I had lost. The son I loved was gone. In his place was a criminal who viewed me as prey, a means to an end. "Can we stop him?" I asked, my voice steadying, hardening, the steel returning. "We can bury him," Lenny said, his voice firm, resolute. "We can file a counter-motion. We can present this evidence to the judge. We can have him arrested for fraud before the sun goes down, before he even has a chance to react." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, the word a quiet, powerful decision. "An arrest is too quick, it's too clean. He'll play the victim. He'll cry to his mother's memory, twisting Eleanor's legacy to suit his narrative. He'll tell the family I'm a vindictive old man who put his son in jail over a misunderstanding. I don't want him to be a martyr, Lenny. I want him to be exposed. I want him to feel the ground crumble beneath his feet, the way he tried to make it crumble beneath mine. I want him to truly understand the consequences of his actions." I picked up the real estate listing. I looked at the price again. $450,000. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street, at the city I had helped build, the tangible proof of my life's work. "Buy it," I said, the words a quiet thunderclap. Lenny paused, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me, Art?" "Buy the building," I repeated, turning to face him, my eyes hard and clear. "Use the liquidity in the trust. Make a cash offer today. Full asking price, $450,000. No contingencies. Quick, close. I want the deed in my name, Arthur Jenkins. By tomorrow afternoon, I want to own every brick, every window, every inch of that property." Lenny stared at me, his mouth slightly open, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, appreciative grin. "You're going to hijack his deal," he said, the realization dawning on him. "I'm going to buy the stage for his little play," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. "And then I'm going to invite him to perform." "Call him," I continued, the plan crystallizing in my mind like concrete setting in a mold, hardening into an unyielding structure. "Call Garrett. Tell him I'm breaking. Tell him the lawsuit has scared me. Tell him I'm confused and tired and I just want to make peace. Tell him I'm ready to give him the money for the lease." Lenny started laughing, a dry, rasping chuckle that shook his chest, a sound of unadulterated delight. "You're going to lure him in," Lenny said, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. "You're going to let him think he won." "I'm going to give him the rope," I said, my voice cold and firm, "and I'm going to watch him tie the noose." "Set up a meeting," I ordered. "Tell him to meet us at the real estate broker's office tomorrow. Tell him to bring the lease agreement. Tell him to bring Chelsea and Brooke. I want the whole family there. I want witnesses to their downfall." "And the medical forgery?" Lenny asked, tapping the affidavit. "The ultimate weapon." "Keep it in your briefcase," I said, a chill in my voice. "That's the nuclear option. When he realizes the money is gone, when he realizes the building is mine, when his entire scheme unravels, he's going to panic. He's going to scream. He might even threaten me again. And that's when you put that paper on the table. That's when we remind him that his freedom hangs by a thread that times am holding." Lenny stood up and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, dry, and reassuring, the hand of a true ally. "I'll make the call, Art," he said, his voice imbued with a newfound energy. "Go home, shave, put on your best suit. Tomorrow you are not the victim. Tomorrow you are the boss. The man who built Riverbend is taking it back." I walked out of the office and into the afternoon sun. The city looked different to me now. It looked sharper, clearer. The fog of grief and confusion that had clouded my mind for 6 months was gone, burned away by the fire of their betrayal, replaced by a crystalline clarity. I knew exactly who my enemies were. I knew exactly what they wanted, and I knew exactly how to destroy them. I got into my truck and started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was a comfort, a powerful, reassuring heartbeat. I drove home, not to hide, not to wallow, but to prepare. I had a building to buy. I had a trap to set. And I had a lesson to teach that my children, my misguided, greedy children, would remember for the rest of their miserable, entitled lives. The harvest, long overdue, was about to begin. End of chapter. I didn't shave for 2 days before I made the call. I let the gray stubble on my chin grow out, prickly and uneven, adding years to my already weathered face. I went into the back of my closet and found an old flannel shirt, the one with the coffee stain on the pocket that Eleanor had always told me to throw away, a relic from a simpler time. I put it on, leaving the top button undone, so my neck looked thin and scraggly, exposed. I even shuffled around the living room in my slippers, kicking a few magazines onto the floor, leaving a half-empty cup of tea on the side table, letting the house look just a little bit like the chaotic squalor they had described in their lawsuit. If they wanted a senile old man, confused and incapable, I was going to give them an Academy Award performance, a portrayal so convincing they wouldn't doubt it for a second. I sat in my favorite recliner, the worn leather chair that still bore Eleanor's scent, letting my shoulders slump forward, collapsing my chest so I looked smaller, less substantial, less threatening. I practiced the tremor in my hand, holding the phone until it shook just enough to be noticeable, to convey frailty, but not enough to look like a cartoon, not enough to betray the performance. Then, with a deep, shaky breath, I dialed Garrett's number. He answered on the first ring. He was expecting this call. He was waiting for the capitulation, the inevitable surrender of the old man. "Dad," he said, his voice clipped and impatient, barely concealing his eagerness. "What is it, Garrett?" I said, letting my voice crack and waver, injecting a note of genuine exhaustion. "Can you come over? You and Chelsea? I can't do this anymore, son. I'm tired. So tired." "Tired of what, Dad? Tired of fighting?" he asked, a subtle smirk in his voice, a hint of triumph already creeping in. I wheezed. "I got the papers. The court papers." "I don't want to go to court, Garrett. Please don't make me go to court. It's too much for an old man. It's too confusing." I heard him cover the mouthpiece. I heard muffled whispering, probably him telling Chelsea that the old man had finally broken, that the stubborn mule had finally bent to their will. When he came back on the line, his voice was smoother, dripping with that fake, saccharine concern that made my skin crawl. "We don't want to go to court either, Dad. We just want what's best for you. We're worried about you. We just want to make sure you're safe and taken care of." "Just come over," I said, my voice weak, playing into their narrative. "We need to talk about the money. I'm ready to talk about the restaurant." They were at my door in 20 minutes, practically sprinting to my house. I didn't get up to let them in. I yelled for them to use the spare key I knew they still had, a symbol of their access, their perceived ownership. When they walked into the living room, I saw them pause. They were scanning the room, taking in the mess, the open magazines strewn on the floor, the unwashed teacup on the side table, the general air of neglect. I saw Chelsea nudge Garrett, a little smirk playing on her lips, a silent communication of victory. They were seeing exactly what they wanted to see. Proof that they were right. Proof that I was failing. Proof that I was becoming the senile old man they desperately needed me to be. Garrett sat on the edge of the sofa opposite me, choosing his seat carefully, maintaining a slight distance, a hint of his contempt. He was wearing a sharp suit, looking every inch the successful businessman he pretended to be, the picture of polished ambition. Chelsea sat next to him, crossing her legs, smoothing down her skirt, looking at me with the kind of pity one reserves for a sick dog that needs to be put down, an animal that has outlived its usefulness. "You look rough, Dad," Garrett said, shaking his head with feigned concern. "Have you been eating? Have you been taking your meds? You look like you haven't slept in days." I looked down at my shaking hands, letting the tremor be more pronounced. "I'm scared, Garrett," I whispered, injecting a tremor into my voice. "I read the petition. You want to put me in a home. You want to take my house. This is all Eleanor and I ever built together." "We don't want to take anything, Art," Chelsea interjected, her voice soft and soothing, a velvet glove disguising an iron fist. "We want to protect you, Harry. You're living here all alone. You're making irrational decisions like selling the truck. We just want to make sure you're safe. And managed like a project, like a liability, like a problem to be contained." I took a deep breath, letting it shudder in my chest, a sound of profound weakness. "I don't want to go to a home," I said, looking up at them, trying to make my eyes look watery and desperate, pleading for mercy. "I want to stay here. This is where your mother is. This is where our memories are." "We can discuss that," Garrett said, crossing his arms, a hint of impatience in his voice. "But Dad, We need to know that you're cooperative. We need to know that you trust us to handle your affairs, to make the best decisions for you. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, a gesture of frailty. If I help you, I said, my voice barely audible, if I give you the money for the restaurant, will you drop the lawsuit? Will you tear up those papers and promise never to file them again? Will you let me stay in my house? The room went silent. I could practically hear their hearts beating faster, the rhythm of their greed accelerating. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for, the surrender. Garrett looked at Chelsea. She gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent signal of agreement, of victory. Dad, if you invest in our future, Garrett said slowly, choosing his words with exaggerated care, like a lawyer presenting a carefully crafted argument. If you show us that you are still capable of making rational decisions for the good of the family, then yes, we can withdraw the petition. We can hire a nurse to come here instead of moving you. We can make this all go away. We can make sure you're comfortable. But we need the capital, Chelsea added quickly, her voice betraying a hint of urgency. The opportunity in the West Loop won't wait. If we lose that location, we lose everything, and then we might have to reevaluate your living situation. We might have no choice. The threat was subtle, but it was there, hanging in the air like smoke, a clear ultimatum: pay up or get locked up. I nodded slowly, staring at the floor, my face a mask of defeat. 500,000? I muttered, as if the number was a great burden. Yes, Garrett said, leaning forward, his voice practically purring with triumph. 500,000. It secures the lease, the equipment, and the initial operating costs. It secures our future, Dad, and yours. It's a win-win. I let out a long sigh, a sound of profound resignation, of ultimate defeat. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Okay, I will do it. Garrett let out a breath he had been holding. He smiled a wide, genuine smile of triumph, a predatory satisfaction. Chelsea squeezed his knee, her eyes glittering with unadulterated greed, already mentally spending the money. That's the right decision, Dad, Garrett said, his voice oozing false warmth. You won't regret it. We can go to the bank right now. I can drive you. We can get a cashier's check. Get this over with. I shook my head, a slow, deliberate movement. No, I said, my voice a little stronger, a hint of steel returning. No check. Garrett's smile faltered, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. What do you mean? You said you would do it. I am not giving you the money, I said, looking up at him, my eyes clearer now, the fog of senility beginning to lift. I am not handing you a check so you can run off and do who knows what. If I am going to do this, I want to do it right. I want to see what I am buying. What do you mean? Chelsea asked, her voice sharp, her patience wearing thin. I want to see the building, I said. I want to meet the landlord. I want to hand the check to the owner of the property myself. I want to sign the lease as a guarantor if I have to make sure it's all legitimate. But I want to be there. I want to see your future, Garrett. If this is going to be my legacy, I want to touch the bricks. Garrett hesitated. I saw the calculations running behind his eyes, the frantic gears turning in his mind. He was wondering if this was a trap. He was wondering if he could pull it off, if his carefully constructed deception would hold up under scrutiny. He had told me he was leasing it, but I knew he was buying it. He probably had the broker set up to play along, or he figured he could explain away the purchase agreement as a lease-to-own deal once we were in the room, confuse me with legal jargon, make me sign something I didn't understand. He was arrogant enough to think he could talk his way through the details, manipulate the situation to his advantage. Dad, that's really complicated, Garrett said, stalling, trying to buy time. The landlord is a busy guy. The broker handles everything. It's all standard procedure. Then call the broker, I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Set up a meeting tomorrow. If I don't hand the check to the person responsible for the building, you don't get a dime. And you can drag me to court, but I will fight you every inch of the way. And I will spend every penny I have on lawyers before I let you declare me incompetent. You'll drain my estate trying to get a cent. It was a gamble. I had to show just enough spine to make the threat real, to remind them that I still had teeth, but keep enough weakness, enough frailty in my demeanor, to make them believe they could still manipulate me, that I was still within their grasp. Garrett looked at Chelsea again. They were having a silent conversation, a rapid exchange of glances. They figured they could handle the broker. They figured that once I saw the papers, they could confuse me with jargon or simply lie about what I was signing, distract me with promises and platitudes. After all, I was just a senile old man who fixed fences at dawn, easily outwitted. "Okay, Dad," Garrett said, finally, a forced smile returning to his face. "Okay, if that's what it takes, we'll set it up for tomorrow morning." "Noon," I said, my voice suddenly sharp. "Noon tomorrow. I need time to get the money ready. Cashier's check, I assume." "Fine," Chelsea said, standing up and smoothing her dress, her eyes still holding a predatory glint. "Noon. But Art, don't back out. If you play games with us tomorrow, the deal is off, and the lawsuit goes forward. Do you understand? We won't tolerate any more of this drama." "I understand," I said, lowering my head again, a picture of weary submission. "I just want peace. I just want this all to be over." "We all want peace, Art," Chelsea said, patting my shoulder with a condescending rhythm, as if I were a child. "You're doing the right thing. Finally." They left the house, walking with a bounce in their step, their faces alight with victory. I watched them through the window as they got into their car, their expensive clothes gleaming in the afternoon sun. I saw them high-five each other, a celebratory gesture of triumph. They were celebrating. They were counting the money. They were picking out the colors for their new kitchen, decorating a future they thought they had just secured. As soon as their taillights disappeared around the corner, I stood up. I straightened my back, a slow, deliberate unfolding of my spine. I unbuttoned the flannel shirt and threw it into the laundry hamper, shedding the costume of the victim. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The gray stubble made me look old, yes, but the eyes staring back at me were clear and cold, sharp with purpose. I grabbed my razor and shaving cream. I shaved off the stubble, revealing the sharp line of my jaw, the strong, unyielding chin. I splashed cold water on my face, washing away the performance, washing away the victim, washing away the pretense. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside the work shirts and the old jackets, the uniforms of my labor. In the back, protected by a plastic cover, was my best suit. It wasn't the charcoal one I wore to Eleanor's funeral, a garment of grief. It was a navy blue Italian wool suit I had bought 10 years ago for a meeting with the City Planning Commission, a meeting where I had to command respect, where I had to show them who was truly in charge. It was tailored. It was sharp. It was the suit of a man who commanded respect, who held power. I laid it out on the bed. I polished my black dress shoes until they shone like mirrors, reflecting the light with a steely gleam. They thought they were walking into a closing. They thought they were walking into a payday. They were walking into an execution, a meticulously planned demolition of their dreams. I picked up my phone and called Lenny. "It's set," I said. "Noon tomorrow." They took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. "Good," Lenny said, his voice laced with grim satisfaction. "I closed on the property an hour ago. The deed is being recorded as we speak. By tomorrow morning, you will legally own every brick, every window, and every square inch of that warehouse." "And the broker?" I asked, a crucial piece of the puzzle. "He's on board," Lenny chuckled, a dry, knowing sound. "It turns out he doesn't like Garrett very much. Garrett tried to cut his commission last week. A classic move. The broker is more than happy to let the real owner of the building run the meeting, to watch the fireworks." "Perfect," I said. "Art," Lenny said, his voice turning serious, the humor fading. "Are you ready for this? When you drop this hammer, there's no going back. They will hate you, truly and utterly hate you." "Let them hate me," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I would rather be hated and respected than loved and robbed. I would rather be true to myself than play their victim." I hung up the phone. I looked around my empty, silent house. Tomorrow the silence would be broken. Tomorrow the truth would come out screaming, raw and unvarnished, and I would be the one holding the microphone. End of chapter. The office of Gilded Gates Realty was located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that pierced the Riverbend skyline like a needle. It was a place designed to intimidate, to make you feel small and insignificant. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the cold, corporate light. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city I had helped build, the city my children now sought to exploit. The air smelled of expensive espresso and money, a heady, artificial scent of ambition. It was the kind of place where people like my son Garrett felt important, where they thought they belonged, and people like me usually felt invisible, a relic from another time. But today, I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a demolition expert walking into a building I was about to implode. I walked in wearing my navy blue Italian suit. I had shaved. I had combed my hair. I looked like the man I used to be, the respected contractor, the pillar of the community, before grief bent my spine and betrayal clouded my eyes. But as soon as I saw them sitting in the conference room, I let my shoulders slump just a fraction. I let a slight hesitation enter my step. I needed them to see the victim one last time. I needed them to believe that the suit was just a costume on a dying man, not the armor of a warrior, sharp and ready for battle. Garrett, Chelsea, and Brooke were already there. They were sitting around a conference table that looked like it cost more than my first house, a massive slab of polished mahogany designed to exude power. They were dressed for a celebration, for a victory lap. Garrett was wearing a suit that was too shiny, a shade of electric blue that screamed new money, a desperate attempt to appear sophisticated. Chelsea was wearing a dress that was probably silk and definitely expensive, a carefully chosen ensemble for her triumph. Even Brooke, who had been sobbing hysterically in my driveway just yesterday, looked radiant today, her tears miraculously dried up, replaced by the glowing anticipation of a payday, the sweet taste of victory. Kevin, her husband, wasn't present, perhaps wisely kept away from the official proceedings. When I walked in, they all stood up. It was a performance of respect, a choreographed dance of beautiful, successful children, greeting their beloved patriarch, their benefactor. "Dad!" Garrett exclaimed, coming over to guide me to the chair at the head of the table, his hand on my elbow, guiding me as if I were made of glass, fragile and delicate. "You look great, really sharp. Here, let me take your hat. Sit down, relax. We have water, coffee, whatever you need. Are you comfortable?" He was playing the doting son, a role he had never truly mastered. I let him. I sat down slowly, deliberately, making a show of settling my old bones into the ergonomic leather chair, sighing softly. "Thank you, son," I said, my voice soft and weary, imbued with a deep fatigue. "It's a long drive. I'm just ready to get this over with, to put it all behind me." "We all are, Art," Chelsea said, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, a predatory grin. "We just want to get everything signed so you can go back home and rest. We know this is stressful for you. You've been through a lot." I looked around the table. At the far end sat a young man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built slick real estate agents. He had perfectly gelled hair, a tan that didn't come from the sun, and a smile that looked painful to maintain, perpetually plastered to his face. This was Jack, the broker, the man who had supposedly orchestrated this deal. Lenny had told me about him. Jack was hungry. Jack was unethical. And Jack had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath his feet was mined, that the entire room was about to explode. "Mr. Jenkins," Jack said, smoothing his tie, his voice unctuous and practiced. "It's an honor to meet you. Garrett has told me so much about you. He says you're a man of vision, a true titan of industry." Asterisk, I bet he did. Asterisk, I thought. Asterisk, I bet he told you I was a senile old cash cow, ready to be milked, a ripe target for exploitation. Asterisk, I just want to help my family, I said out loud, keeping my eyes on the table, maintaining my facade of weary resignation. To see them settled, to see them finally making something of themselves. Of course, Jack said, his voice oozing insincerity. And this deal will certainly do that. It's a unique structure, Mr. Jenkins. Very forward-thinking, very innovative. It's going to be a real game-changer for Riverbend. He slid a thick document across the polished wood surface. It stopped right in front of me, a dark omen. The cover page was heavy stock paper, cream-colored with gold lettering. Commercial lease agreement. Term, 10 years. Total initial capitalization, $500,000. I stared at the document. I didn't open it immediately. I let the silence stretch out, drawing out their anticipation, their nervous energy. I could hear Garrett tapping his foot nervously under the table. Asterisk. Tap, tap, tap. Asterisk. The rhythm of greed, the impatient beat of their impending doom. Is this it? I asked, my voice weak, a final query from a confused old man. This is it, Dad, Garrett said, leaning forward, his eyes bright with barely suppressed excitement. This secures the space. Once you sign this and provide the funds, the landlord hands over the keys. We can start demolition next week, get the ball rolling on our dream. I opened the folder. My eyes, still hidden behind their mask of frailty, scanned the legal jargon, the dense paragraphs, the fine print. It was a masterpiece of deception, a meticulously crafted trap. The contract was a triple net lease, which meant the tenant was responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintenance, shifting all the liability onto me, the supposed guarantor. But the kicker, the true heart of their scam, was the upfront payment. It wasn't a security deposit. It was labeled as a capital improvement contribution. Essentially, I was paying $500,000 to renovate a building I wouldn't own for a business I wouldn't control. And there, tucked away on page 15, was the clause Lenny had warned me about, the assignment clause. It allowed the tenant, BNT Hospitality, to assign the lease or sublet the property without the guarantor's permission. It meant they could take my money, fix up the building, and then sublease it to someone else, keeping the profit, the equity, while I stayed on the hook for the liability, for the monthly payments, for a business that might never even open. It was theft, wrapped in a lawyer's suit, a cunning maneuver designed to bleed me dry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses, the cheap plastic frames a stark contrast to their expensive surroundings. I put them on slowly, adjusting the frames on my nose, peering at the document with a squint. I reached for the heavy silver pen that Jack had placed next to the document. My hands started to shake. I let the tremor travel from my wrist to my fingers until the pen rattled against the paper. A subtle vibration, a physical manifestation of weakness, of my supposed failing health. I heard Brooke let out a small breath of impatience. She checked her watch, a designer piece that glinted on her wrist. She was probably wondering if the bank would still be open to cash the check if the old man didn't hurry up. Just sign on the bottom line, Dad, Garrett said, his voice tight with barely contained eagerness, pointing to the signature block with a manicured finger. Right there next to the X. It's all perfectly standard. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip hovered millimeters above the line. I looked at the ink flowing from the nib. It was black, permanent, irreversible. I took a breath, a deep, shuddering inhalation. I thought about the hospital. I thought about the cold wind in the parking lot. I thought about the silence of my phone for 6 months, the utter abandonment. The faces of Eleanor, Silas, Clarabelle flashed in my mind, a beacon of integrity against the darkness of their greed. I'm not sure, I said, my voice quavering, playing my part to perfection. It's a lot of money, Garrett. Are you sure this is the right thing to do? This is everything Eleanor and I worked for. Garrett's patience snapped. He reached out and put his hand over mine, trying to steady it, trying to force the pen down, his grip surprisingly strong, fueled by desperation. Dad, we talked about this, he hissed, his voice tight, barely audible, laced with fury. You promised! Do you want the lawsuit to go forward? Do you want the court to get involved? Just sign the damn paper so we can all go home. Sign it, Art, Chelsea urged, her voice shrill, a thin veneer of civility cracking. It's for the best. Don't be difficult now. We're so close. You're ruining everything. I looked at Jack, the broker. He was sweating, wiping his upper lip with a handkerchief, his eyes darting between me and Garrett, then Chelsea. He knew this was coercion. He knew this was elder abuse. But he wanted his commission, the sweet taste of his ill-gotten gains. So he looked away, pretending to study a file on his laptop, a silent accomplice to their crime. I looked back at the paper. I watched the tip of the pen touch the fiber. A tiny dot of ink bloomed on the signature line, a prelude to their supposed victory. Then I stopped. I froze my hand, I stopped the shaking. I let the tremor die out completely until my hand was as steady as a stone pillar, as unyielding as the foundations I had poured. I lifted the pen. I placed it gently on the table, lining it up perfectly parallel with the edge of the document, a gesture of absolute control. I sat up straight. I pushed my chest out, filling the Italian suit the way it was meant to be filled, with the strength of a man who knew his worth. I took off my reading glasses and folded them, placing them deliberately in my breast pocket. When I looked up, my eyes were not the eyes of a confused old man. They were the eyes of a foreman who just caught a crew cutting corners, of a seasoned veteran spotting a dangerous flaw in a blueprint. They were cold, clear, and hard, reflecting the polished surface of the table, reflecting the truth. I looked past Garrett. I looked past Chelsea and Brooke. I locked my gaze directly onto Jack, the broker, his face suddenly paling, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "Jack," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room without shouting, without raising an octave, a sound of quiet power. Jack jumped, startled by the sudden change in tone, by the unexpected assertion. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins?" he stammered, caught off guard. I tapped the document with a steady finger. "I'm confused, Jack," I said, my voice dripping with deceptive politeness. "Confused, sir?" "Yes," I continued, leaning forward, the leather of the chair creaking under my weight. "You seem to be a competent young man. You work for a reputable firm, so I have to ask you a question. A very simple question." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy, letting their anticipation build. "Why did you hand me a 10-year lease agreement for $500,000 when this morning at 9 o'clock, your boss, Mr. Henderson, sent over the purchase agreement for the entire building?" The room went dead silent. It wasn't a quiet silence, not the absence of noise. It was a vacuum. It was the sound of all the air being sucked out of the room at once, a sudden, terrifying emptiness. Garrett froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His carefully crafted deception shattered. Chelsea's head snapped toward Jack so fast I thought her neck would crack, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Jack turned pale. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, a hole to crawl into, a way to escape the sudden, crushing weight of exposure. I don't know what you mean, sir," Jack stammered, his voice thin, his composure gone. "The lease, this is the deal," Garrett structured. I ignored Garrett, whose face was rapidly turning purple. I kept my eyes on Jack, my gaze unblinking, unwavering. "I bought the building, Jack," I said, each word a hammer blow. "I wired $450,000 to your firm's escrow account at 10:15 this morning. The deed transfer was recorded an hour ago with the Cook County Clerk of Court. I own the bricks. I own the dirt. I own the air conditioning unit on the roof. I own every single piece of that property. So, why are you asking me to sign a lease for a property I already own?" Garrett stood up so fast his chair fell over backward, crashing onto the polished floor with a deafening clatter, a sound that underscored the abruptness of his collapse. "What are you talking about?" he screamed, his voice cracking, filled with a desperate, frantic disbelief. "You didn't buy it! You don't have the money to buy it! You're broke! You're a senile old man!" I slowly turned my head to look at my son. I didn't shout. I didn't stand up. I just looked at him with a pity that was worse than anger, a profound sense of sorrow for what he had become. "Sit down, Garrett," I said, my voice calm, unwavering. "The adults are talking." Garrett stood there, his chest heaving, his face a mask of shock and betrayal, looking like a man who had just watched his parachute fail to open, plunging toward an inevitable crash. The silence in the room, thick and suffocating, was broken only by the sound of a door opening behind me. It was the side office. The one Jack the broker had claimed was empty storage, just a utility closet. Lenny walked out. He wasn't wearing his usual rumpled cardigan. He was wearing his court suit, charcoal gray and sharp as a razor blade, the uniform of a legal warrior. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and a thick document with a blue cover in the other. "Who the hell is this?" Garrett demanded, stepping back, his eyes darting between me and the new arrival, a frantic cornered animal. "This is my lawyer," I said calmly, a quiet authority in my voice. And he is the man who just closed the deal. Lenny walked to the table without saying a word, his expression unreadable. He placed the blue document in the center of the polished wood, right on top of the lease agreement they had tried to force me to sign. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the table echoed like a judge's gavel, a final, definitive pronouncement. "It's a certified copy of the warranty deed," Lenny said, his voice dry and professional, cutting through the stunned silence. "Recorded with the Cook County Clerk of Court at 10:15 this morning. The property located at 1142 West Randolph Street has been sold." "Sold?" Garrett whispered, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost, a hollowed-out shell. "Sold to who?" Lenny pointed a finger at the document. "Read the grantee line, Garrett." Garrett leaned over, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright, his entire body trembling. He read the name, Arthur Jenkins. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock and confusion, a profound sense of disbelief. "You bought it?" he stammered, the words barely escaping his throat. "You actually bought it?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, a quiet sense of justice unfolding. "I told you I wanted to see where my money was going," I said. "I told you I wanted to touch the bricks. Well, now I own them. I own the roof. I own the floor. I own the dirt underneath. I paid $450,000 cash, and I got a good deal too." "But why?" Garrett cried, his voice laced with desperation, his entire scheme crumbling around him. "Why buy it? We just needed the lease. We needed the capital for the build-out. This doesn't make any sense." "Because I know what you were doing," I said, my voice dropping to a growl, the last vestiges of my pity vanishing, replaced by cold, hard accusation. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the second file, the one Lenny had prepared with the private investigator. I threw it onto the table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Chelsea, a damning indictment. "I know about B&T Hospitality Group," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. "I know you weren't going to lease the building. You were going to use my $500,000 to buy it outright in your name. You were going to tell me it was for rent and renovations while you pocketed the deed, while you stole my money and my property." Chelsea turned pale, her hand flying to her mouth, a gasp escaping her lips. "And then," I continued, standing up slowly, deliberately, to loom over them, a towering figure of justice. "I know what the second step was. You were going to wait 6 months, maybe paint the walls, do some cosmetic fixes. Then you were going to go to a bank and take out a commercial mortgage against the property, a cash-out refinance. You were going to pull out $300,000 of equity, pure cash, and run." I pointed a finger at Garrett, his face a mask of abject horror. "You were going to use that money to pay off your $53,000 in gambling debt. You were going to pay off the credit cards you maxed out on lavish dinners and trips with your mistress. And you were going to use the rest to keep pretending you are a big shot, a successful businessman, while I was left holding the bag for a restaurant that was never going to open, a fraudulent enterprise." Garrett stepped back, hitting the wall with a thud, his entire body shaking. "That is not true," he protested, his voice thin and weak, crumbling under the weight of the evidence. "We were going to open the restaurant. It was a business plan. It was a dream." "It was a shell game," I roared, slamming my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "You think I am stupid? You think because I work with my hands, I can't read a balance sheet? I built this city, boy. I know a hustle when I see one. You were going to steal a $500,000 asset from your own father and then mortgage it to cover your mistakes, to pay for your lavish, dishonest lifestyle." Chelsea let out a screech that sounded like a wounded animal, a raw, primal cry of outrage and thwarted greed. "You tricked us," she screamed, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage, all pretense of civility gone. "You lied to us. You said you would give us the money. You promised." "I didn't promise you anything," I said coldly, my voice cutting through her hysteria. "I said I would handle it, and I did. I protected my investment. I protected what was mine. You, on the other hand, tried to steal it." "You stole our future," she yelled, lunging toward the table as if she could claw the deed away, as if she could reclaim her stolen dream. That building was supposed to be ours. We found it. It was our idea. Ideas are free, Chelsea, I said, my voice sharp, unforgiving. Real estate costs money, and since you don't have any money because your husband gambled it all away on online poker, you don't get the building. It's that simple. Brooke, who had been silent this whole time, her face a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension, stood up slowly. She looked at the file on the table, then at Garrett, her eyes wide. Gambling? She asked, her voice trembling, a new level of betrayal added to the mix. Garrett, you said it was a business loan. You said the $50,000 was for permits. He lied to you too, Brooke, I said, softening my tone just a fraction, a brief moment of sympathy for her unwitting complicity. He lied to everyone. There is no business. There is no loan shark. There is just a man who can't stop betting on sports and buying things he can't afford. A man lost to his own vices.